So first of all, let's start with some of the important things, and I'm just going to put this slide up again so you can see it. So here we are. The Synod every week has been putting out a frequently asked questions document. Yeah, so every week there's a new document put out, and at this moment, the document's being updated almost daily because of the updates that the government's putting out, not only in public, but also in the directions that are the legal elements of what's been announced in the public releases from the Premier. So our Synod communications team have been working with insurance and risk and legal to ensure that we have all the right information. So taking us back to this, this is the place to go to on a regular basis. You can go there on that website. We've got a copy on the Presbytery website. We try to keep that up to date. And you'll see also on that website, there are a number of really valuable resources, which we'll talk about today. So that's the first good news, is that there are continually updated resources. And those resources are not just updated because of the government instructions, but also the questions that come out of this kind of session. And if you have a question, we'll give you the email address to send at the end as well, to send a direct question, copy me in as well, so I can get to see the answer. So the communications crisis management team are fielding lots of inquiries every day. And often there are things that we haven't thought about, that you have thought about because you're in a situation that requires some answers. The good news is that work permits from November the 9th won't be needed. So Peter Wiltshire, you'll be able to travel around without having to get a work permit from November the 9th. I know some of our ministers and other people have to travel more than 25 Ks. In the meantime, this coming week, you can travel beyond 25 Ks for work purposes, but you do need a work permit for that in the next week. Okay, so that's the good news and the news around patience. So in a week's time, our ministry agents and volunteers won't need a work permit to turn up at the church, to record a worship service, to clean the gardens, to visit people with the handouts from the service and so on. So that's really good news, but do not shred your permit. You just never know when it might be needed again. So we hope we don't need to, but hang on to those if you've got those organised. That's the first one. The second one is outdoor gatherings. You would have seen that at the moment, our churches are able to have 20 people gathering outside on the property of the church for the purposes of worship. So 20 people plus a faith leader. Now, you may wonder who a faith leader is. And we talked about this yesterday, that yes, obviously, if you've got a minister whose job it is, that's a faith leader. But we also recognize that in the Uniting Church, we have a wide range of people who may be responsible for leading a worship service, and that may be someone else. So it may be a children's worker, for example, or it might be an elder who has responsibility for leading worship. And it doesn't have to be the person who does it every week. It could be a person who's rostered on. So 20 people outside plus one worship leader. So that's in effect 21 people. And of course, there are some important things to take into account for planning so that it's a COVID safe environment still. So one thing is that we're not able to serve food as part of what we operate. Encourage people to bring their own food and drink if they're going to have a drink. So thermos flasks are all the thing now. So being able to have either something to keep your drink cold and pour it into, or something hot and pour it into, it's a bit like the days of old when we used to have picnics with everybody with their own thermos flasks. So that's the first thing to bear in mind. On November 9th, we're likely to have a bit more freedom, and by Christmas there'll be even more freedom, I think. So if you're wondering about your plans for Christmas, we're going to be able to have more gatherings outside. Now, people have been asking that on the government's statements and on the frequently asked questions, we talk about public gatherings and worship gatherings outside. The difference is a public gathering is a gathering in a public place, like a park. So if you're going to Jallis Park or something like that, 10 people in a group. Does that make sense? So it's a bit different. And of course, on a public park, you might have a whole bunch of groups of 10 who are meeting there. But it's to prevent too intense a cluster of people meeting in those places. Whereas they believe that if we're running a worship service or a prayer gathering on our own property, we're more likely to be able to monitor and provide support for a COVID-safe environment. So that's outdoor gatherings and indoor gatherings. So at the moment, up to now, we've only been able to broadcast with 5 people inside, and now it's 10 people plus a faith leader. So that's effectively 11 people. And for many of our congregations, it will mean that they're going to continue to broadcast their worship services over, even over the summer months. They're going to continue the way they have been. And they may have more people in the room. Though, of course, the more people in the room, the more you have to pay attention to the environment that you're providing. And once again, no cup of tea in the kitchen afterwards. No donuts on a plate, no biscuits being served. People have to bring their own. And that applies to communion as well. So we're not able to pass the plate around with the communion. The exception might be if I know Mount Martha took my advice earlier and managed to order 100 individually wrapped communion packages. So a little bit of grape juice and a wafer, which each person can have and take home with them when they finish, take home the wrapping. So those are the stipulations around that. November 9th, it's likely to increase to 20 people inside, I think. And we don't know where we'll be at Christmas, but it may be more. I think the hope of the government is that we're moving towards the place where we can have less focus on numbers and more on the space available to each person. So the 4 square meter rule, like we were using back in July, which we were moving towards that, that will be likely to be applied maybe by Christmas, but later on. But the likelihood of being able to serve food, David Herbert's advice yesterday was it's not likely that we'll be able to serve food in our churches or outside our churches well into next year, maybe July next year, before that actually becomes possible. So whatever we're doing now, we need to get used to a pattern that will work for us. We've had people asking about singing in church, and we asked David Herbert about this yesterday. So what's the deal with the Synod's frequently asked questions outline that the Premier's department have not banned singing. They've actually banned choirs from meeting in places, but they haven't banned congregational singing. But the Synod is aware of the research that's being provided around the world and helping us be aware of the risks that are associated with the distribution of droplets through singing, even through poppy kind of speaking. So yep, it's important to wear masks inside when we're meeting, and if you're going to sing, you need to definitely be wearing masks and have plenty of ventilation, and ensure that these singers who are broadcasting their voices more than others maybe. I think we have a few members who are keen broadcasters as well. They need to be standing away from others and a further distance from each other. So there's, in the frequently asked questions document, you'll find some ways of mitigating risk. Some congregations will avoid singing. All right, so we're encouraging people to take care. And my mantra for this time has been through all this year: take care and take time. Take the time to actually work these things through and not be in a rush to re-enter these spaces, but also take care for our members who are still vulnerable. And look, we'll come back with some questions as we come to the end of this presentation. Tenants returning, and we're getting lots of questions around this. Who can actually enter our spaces? We're getting people turning up saying, well, we'd like to restart our support group. We'd like to restart our junior ballet. We'd like to restart dance classes and so on. And where the Synod's working on a list. There's actually a few already listed on the frequently asked questions document, but there's a bit more nuance than we thought. So for people under the age of 18, there's a lot of activities that can start on the 9th of November. For example, ballet, dance classes, exercise-related learning, education, tutoring. But for people over the age of 18, there's a lot more restrictions. So that's what's the deal at the moment. And we'll have some more clarity coming out about this. Hopefully by Monday or Tuesday, there'll be a list coming out. COVID safe checklists. I'm sure we all had a look at the detailed checklist back in July and worked away on that. Some of our congregations thought it was too hard and said we're not opening for a while. But many of our congregations worked through that checklist, which gave all kinds of feedback around how we're going to clean our buildings and how we're going to ensure that we know who's come into the building, people have signed in, signed out. We have ways of making sure that people know the restrictions that we have. There's now a one-page reopening checklist provided for us, which are priority tasks for church facilities. Now, do not be deceived by the brevity of this document. It's a one-page document which is designed to reduce your anxiety. But if you look at any of these closer, which we can have a look later on, for example, there's one line basically around essential safety measures, recognizing that over the last 6 months, we may not have had any inspections of our buildings, and we need to pay attention to things like fire access, making sure the lights are working and so on. So that's a bit of work to just in one line around essential safety measures. So there's a few of those things that it's easier for one person to work through on behalf of a congregation and for the church council to ensure that they have everything in line before they reopen for renters or for worship. Op shops, they are able to open depending on the local government regulations. So check with your local city council in terms of what they're saying. But in terms of the Synod, there's the freedom to open, but there's a further document, the one that we had back in July. It's worth working that through. And Alnira Dulakovic from Synod is keen to see your documents if you're going to open the op shop. So there's a number of things in place if you're going to have the op shop open, because usually they're smaller spaces. We don't always have control of who comes in and out of those spaces. and also many of our volunteers are more vulnerable in op shops. You may notice that Uniting have until recently been saying they're not going to open their op shops. So Uniting Vic has, but generally our locally run op shops are able to open. Just be careful. Take time and take care. Can you have a working bee? Depends on how many bees in the hive are turning up. So there's some stipulation from the government that we can have up to 5 people go and work on a site somewhere, an outdoor site, and that would apply to our working bees. So no, not 20 people turning up. The police will turn up pretty quickly, but if you have 5 people working on your lawns and your garden at a time, that should be fine. Unless you're traveling from further than 25 k's this week, you don't need a worker's permit to do that, and next week you won't need one. Food ministry, I believe that some of our organisations that are registered as providing food ministry are able to explore opening now, but we're taking advice on that. That's from what I understand. And community gardens, once again, that's another an outdoor activity, and I think that the same principles around the working bees would apply to community gardens, being able to limit the number of people who can gather at any particular point in the community gardens. And there's David Herbert's information there. He's the insurance and risk person who is happy to take questions, emails, and then the crisis management email address, which I'll put in the chat for you as well. So that's a fairly rapid rundown of the situation. And now I'm going to stop sharing and we'll see what we've got in the questions. And if you want to speak, I've muted everybody, but if you want to speak and come up to the top of the list, so to speak, come into the microphone, just unmute yourself and we'll take your questions. So here we are. Is it necessary to keep a record of attendance when gathering outdoors? Well, I would say, yes, it is a good idea to keep a record of attendance. When you have a registered meeting of the church, that's in the name of the church, it is useful to have that record of attendance. It would be part of your return, your checklist, your COVID safe plan. After 9/11, yes, it is going to be 9/11, church officers like the treasurer are able to visit the office in the church buildings, and yes, the answer is yes. So from the 9th of November, in fact, even now, there is no restriction on opening up our buildings for work. If you're traveling more than 25 k's at the moment, you still need a worker permit. But at the moment, there is no restriction on people turning up to our offices as long as you are complying with your own internal COVID safe plan. Yes, the government is still encouraging people to work from home. So if you can work from home, rather than spending lots of time together with other people in enclosed spaces, we encourage people to work from home as much as possible. So Annika and I and Craig and Ian first, we're all working from home, and we have been all year since March. And that will continue for quite some time, except for occasions when we need to be at the office. For example, last week, Craig and I hosted the Sacred Spaces Digital Places seminar from the church office because Craig's internet is terrible. So we got together with the new NBN connection at the Presbytery office. Ron Adams is asking, is there a list of acceptable deep cleaning firms available from the Synod or Presbytery for congregations? And I know Gavin Fakeney's from Property Committee has done some research and found one, but I think we might need a number of firms, and we'll get that out this coming week. And who wants to see the op shop documents? It's in the, yes, Carol Ann from Chelsea, it's in the Synod Frequently Asked Questions document. There's a whole section there on options, and at the end of it, there's a recommendation that you send your recovery plan to the risk management officer. Okay, have we got some people with any questions? Julie.
Hi, Duncan. Hi, everyone. 2 questions. I didn't catch the answer to the question, are we able to visit people in their homes for pastoral care?
Are we able to visit people in their homes for pastoral care? I haven't seen anything about that, to tell the truth.
Okay.
As far as I can see, the same principles would apply. You would become one of those people who visit as one of their one people, one household for the day. Does that make sense? So
Yes.
there's been, I have not seen anything about special dispensation for pastoral care on top of that.
And what about hospital visiting, or does that depend on the hospital?
I would think it would depend on hospitals. Yes, I mean, there's still the proposal around last rites for people at the end of their life. There's definitely there's been government statements about a faith leader being able to visit a person in a hospital or in an aged care facility or at their home, and that person would need to, or they've said it needs to be a person registered with the ATO, which means that they're actually employed for that purpose. And that's the only situation where I've seen the ATO mentioned. So it doesn't apply to our worship leaders, for example.
My other questions around Holy Communion, we thought we'd figured that out, but from what you've said, I don't know that we have. We thought that from some original guidelines that came out, that if only the minister gave the bread and the wine and it was all in individual cups or a individual wafer, it would be okay, but I'm suspecting it's not.
There's not a lot of appetite for heading in that direction, and I see Annika's shaking her head. Do you want to say tell us more, Annika? Because we've got a lot more data to work from now across the world.
Yes, and I remember Joy Blameyer's induction, where we had a communion and we tried to do it as COVID safe as we possibly could. And with individual wafers and little cups, even filling the cups, putting them in the trays, people breathing over the trays, even when you cover them. Wafers, the same thing, people touching them, people breathing over them while you're bringing them out, while you're handing them out. There's so many moments where things could go wrong that I think we thought it through before that, and when it happened and after it happened, my anxiety level skyrocketed, because doing it, I realized all the things that could go wrong.
Well, our theory was that if the presider was the only one that touched anything before, afterwards, and during, and did a ritual of lavabo, of physically using sanitizer in front of the congregation.
Well, possibly. And if you then were wearing a mask and gloves all the time.
And even then, the gloves are not necessarily that great. They might protect you, but they don't necessarily protect everybody else. Yeah, so that's the trick. So it's not going to be easy for quite some time. Sorry, Julie. There's been no blanket ban from the Synod around communion, but we haven't been given the green light to head down that track. At the moment, the only information from the Synod around communion is take note of the Assembly's provision at this time for communion using online media to help people have communion by themselves at home.
Mm.
Maybe if, I don't know, I mean, that's the difficulty that at this point where our theology is around one loaf and one cup, isn't it? That's that sense that we are together in one meal, and the idea of having communion in separated places is just not wonderful. But the same thing happened when the typhoid epidemics of the late 18th or 19th century and early 20th century, and the polio epidemics. The model of having separate pieces of bread or wafers and separate little glasses was introduced. People were throwing their hands up in horror about how terrible the theology was of these individual glasses. But it became a matter of hygiene that was going to save lives. And at the moment, we're not out of the woods yet until we have a vaccine. And even then, it will take some while before that starts to take its effect. So we have, as a presbytery, just a bit like the singing, we have to take the care to do it well, or to avoid the risk altogether.
Thank you very much.
Okay, sorry to be, well, I can try to do it with a smile.
Me too.
All right, John and Vivian Aldridge.
Thank you, Duncan. Just a question. My question relates to the pre-recording worship
Yes.
that we're thinking about having done now at church.
Yep.
Having the 5 people who'd be required to do the recording and all that stuff,
Yes.
but inviting 5 of the congregational members, so we're within the numbers.
Yep.
My question relates to it's about page 3 in the FAQs document, the last one.
Yes.
It talks about live streaming, and it talks about a COVID recovery action plan checklist, sections A, B, and C that must be completed and sent in to Victor.
Oh, yes. Oh, look, I don't think the Synod wants to see those. No.
So
We asked David Herbert.
Are we now just replacing that with the reopening checklist? And
yeah, the reopening checklist is the one that the reopening checklist is designed for you as a church council to be able to work through what's in place. The more detailed one is really to help you unpack some of the more detailed questions that you might need to address. So the Synod is not expecting to have a whole 500, 600 recovery checklists coming in. They don't want to see them.
Right, despite the fact that it says quite categorically.
I know it does, yes. I would apply it to the op shops, but in terms of...
Okay, so we don't need to. I'm happy if we don't have to.
Yeah. If you want to check it with, you can send it to...
I'm happy to take your word, but...
Yeah.
You know,
well, that's what Vivian.
List.
Vivian, that's what David said yesterday. That they are satisfied. The earlier stages were that they wanted to be sure that people were taking care, and they were monitoring that, and they've seen a lot of plans come through, and they're satisfied that the plan is working. And part of that is to make sure that the plan's adequate, that the template's helpful, and the feedback that came from that is that, well, it's actually a bit overwhelming, and some people just threw up their hands in despair and didn't do anything. So having the one-page document is a bit more accessible. You can work on it. You can very quickly see, have you got everything you need in place?
Yeah, that's good.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
That all right? That's good.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Belinda.
Just a quick question. We have a couple of beautiful ladies in our congregation who like to make like birthday cakes for people who have got birthdays. Is it okay to still like have people like make food giftings and like deliver them to people in the congregation, even though like we're not allowed to share food communally? How does that work?
Yes, I think that might be a neither confirm nor deny situation.
That's not helpful.
I'm sorry. getting down to that level. Like, what do you think, Annika?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I've over this week I've taken some food to my kids that they've been missing in the last couple of months. Maybe you know, that same thing applies with, or you can think of where only one person from one household is able to visit a person from the other household, and if then they bring some food that hasn't been in contact with anybody else, I could imagine that would. But yeah.
Can I quote you, Annika?
Yes. So what we want, Belinda, what we want to avoid is our cake ministry becoming a super spreader ministry.
Yeah.
Look.
All right. So
I mean, I'm all for avoiding a super spreader.
Yeah, exactly right. So, and you never know when you actually have become the super spreader until later. So, and that's one of the purposes of slowing these things down, is for having the one person or one household visiting one another each day, so that we don't have one person who within 24 hours manages to infect 24 people. So that's the purpose of that. So the same thing would apply to a cake ministry, and being careful about who visits who.
Okay.
Yep.
And not one person going around to multiple other persons with a cake they've touched, breathed on, etc.
We'll discourage that for sure.
Yep. There's a question there about our internal cafes in the church premises. Are they the same rules as commercial restaurants? Well, the rules for commercial restaurants have been relaxed because they are registered and they carry financial responsibility for what they're doing. They employ staff who are held accountable. Whereas our internal cafes and church premises, some churches do have commercial cafes, but if it's just an internal cafe, where the same principle applies. It's the same as running, putting the zip on in the kitchen and serving a number of people in association with an event. We're not to serve food with events. Having said that, when I go to the office, the presbytery office, I'm going to turn the kettle on and make myself a cup of tea. But having said that, I will use the wipes, the antiseptic alcohol-based wipes that are sitting on the table in the office to clean up after I'm finished there. So that's a bit different to running an internal cafe where a number of people come in and serve themselves. Does that answer that question, Ron?
Yes, it does. I was thinking more, it's a semi-commercial type cafe.
Yes,
operation.
This is at St. John's, yeah.
Yes, and I'm just not, they're totally volunteers, of course, and they're all church people. Yeah. And I just wondered whether, because I went to Glenferrie Road yesterday and I could see the restaurant starting up, and I wondered if we were allowed to do that. Yeah.
Well, I'd say at this time we're not. Yeah, so it's that the whole process of opening up and being the emerging church and the emerging society is that we take step by step the
no, that's fine.
Increased risks, yeah. So yeah, wait and see. There might come a time, who knows when, but the time will come when we're able to be more relaxed around serving of food and drink in those environments. There's one, Denise Nash says, AA, Narcotics Anonymous they are allowed, yes, if they have the necessary COVID safe plan in place and comply with church COVID safe plans. Yes, the government's saying no food and no shared utensils. That's really helpful, Denise. And of course, coming from regional Victoria and regional New South Wales, they've been in this place for a bit longer, and that's how it's all working. But yes, support groups are able to meet in our church buildings, in our church halls, as long as they are putting the COVID safe plan in place. and we have our COVID safe plan, which is there's some consistency there. Alrighty, and
Duncan?
David Hyam, yes.
Yeah, sorry. I just want to share with the people who are asking about the internal cafes and everything.
Yep.
My daughter-in-law works for the Restaurant and Catering Association of Australia. So they're helping to organise training for all the commercial cafes. And there's really quite a strict regime of how people are trained and the procedures that they have to follow. So although it looks like the cafes are just opening up and doing business as normal, it's far from normal. There's very strict procedures in there. So just because a commercial cafe is opening up, sorry about that.
Yep.
Okay, I've cleared that. Just because a commercial cafe is opening up doesn't necessarily mean we have the skills to be able to do that. You'd need really quite special training.
Yes, and of course, if you've been to a cafe or restaurant this week, you'd know that the staff will be looking at a little stressed as they're trying to work these things out and do it properly. So that, yep, that's helpful. And at some point, I imagine we'll be able to provide our own volunteers with that kind of training. That will be really helpful. But at this point, the focus is on the commercial businesses. And David, do you want to say more about the hearing impairment situation?
Okay, it was really just, if we're in people wanting to wear a mask, the worship service, indoors or outdoors, we were thinking outdoors. I don't think we're going to be meeting indoors. I'm assuming that whoever is leading the worship will be able to take the mask off while they're speaking, because we have a number of people who need to be able to see the lips. Gosh, sorry about that. Need to be able to read the lips in order to understand what's happening. So you couldn't speak through a mask and have the microphone pick it up. You'd really need to, people need to be able to see your face. Indeed. And I'm assuming that because we do that at funerals, that we'll be able to do that at this worship service.
Yes, that's true. That is indeed the case. Now, is Ray McCluskey in the room? Right.
Yes, I am.
Tell us a bit. Can you tell us about how you're handling this in your recording of services? Have you worked out a routine yet for how you handle masks and so on?
Yeah, we've got a COVID safe plan in. We have had one for ever since we've been in level 4, and prior to that as well. So we've been pre-recording services for almost 8 months.
Yep.
So what we do is everybody who's in the worship space that doesn't need to, we have the restrictions in terms of numbers, but what we try and do is anybody that's in the worship space within the numbers has to have the mask on and be socially distanced. Whoever's in front of the camera is allowed to have the mask off, and then basically once they're finished, they have to leave. Because we shoot all of the worship service in individual segments. So those participating in a segment come do their part of a service and then leave immediately. And anyone that's in the worship service waiting to do their bit have to wear a mask.
Yeah.
They sanitize when they come in. They go and wash their hands. Then they come back and re-sanitize. Then they go and sit down, socially distanced, wait to do their bit. Then go back and re-sanitize and then leave the premises.
And what do they do with their mask? Ray, have you worked that out? Do they put it in their pocket? Do they put it down somewhere?
So they have it with them. And then what happens is after each segment, I have to go and wipe everything that they've been in front of. So if they're using the lectern or the pulpit, after they've finished and they've left, and before the next segment happens, I go up and I re-wipe everything, re-sanitize everything, and then the next person come and does their bit.
Alrighty, so I wonder what that might mean for live worship if we're going to be live streaming. It's not as simple as just, well, we're just going to record our services. I know Mount Eliza have been live streaming the whole time, but they likewise have people with masks on in the building, and the people in front of the microphone or in front of the camera they would have their mask off.
It would be my view that live worship is a much more problematic way to do worship, where you can stop and recommence, and then you just stitch those bits of the service together. And it appears seamless, but it's much more stop and start.
Yeah. And so a big thing is to reduce the number of people who are in one space. So even a shared space, one after another. So our value of having multiple people involved in worship, that may be something we need to think about. Yep.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say the other thing that we've progressed to is we're recording much more, having people participating in the service and recording at home, their bit at home, using a cloud service, and I just grab those bits and stitch them as parts. So a lot of the time people don't even have to be in the worship space. Yeah,
that's really helpful. Thanks, Ray. Now, Di, you've got some comments there because you've been involved with live streaming as well.
Yes, we do a live stream from Glen Waverley. The general people who do it, Neil, the minister, and Eleni, the youth worker person, they have their own mics. On Sunday, I will have a lapel mic, which is one that I would always use, and the other minister will be using the lectern mic. And so what happens is, yes, you wear your mask when you're not doing anything other than when you're in front of the camera, mask off. We have Bible readings that are recorded at home by whoever's doing the Bible reading, the same with the prayers of the people. But everything else is done live at the church, and we have a team sitting with their masks on, controlling all the stuff that happens. So yes, we have to sign in, sign out, disinfect our hands, all that sort of stuff. It's really important. But yes, we've managed to be able to maintain the live stream, except when there's bugs in the system and it decides not to happen.
Right. And of course, the more ambitious we are about what we're trying to do, the more chances there are that something will happen that we hadn't expected.
Absolutely. You can bet your life. Well, it's happened twice that everything's been set to go and something's gone wrong with the system. So we've had 2 services that people have had to watch afterwards.
Yes. We heard from Mark Berry in the UK when he was speaking through our Facebook Live seminar on the 20th, that Zoom decided to update their system at the same time as services were happening on Sunday morning in the UK. So it all fell over Zoom services across the UK. You can imagine the frustration. So anyway, that's we're lucky that we've generally most things work okay for us. But yes, to come back to your question there, David, in an outdoor setting, the same principle would apply. That when you're speaking on behalf of the congregation to the congregation, that you'd be able to take your mask off. And I was asking Ray what they did with their mask. You want to have a system in place so that you're not leaving your mask lying around for other people on services that other people are putting their masks on. You actually are consistent, and that people can see that you're being consistent because it's public. It's people are watching. And if you notice, politicians for a while struggled to get used to that idea, and they're getting better at it now in terms of working out where they put their mask. And Janet, yep.
I just wanted to clarify, going back to what you were talking about, the COVID safe plans.
Yes.
So the checklist for congregations, that page one, is actually just for us to check that we've got everything straight before we reopen.
Yes, it is. That's right.
And then the COVID safe work plan, is that the government template one or the Synod template one?
It's the Synod template one, which is much more detailed. It's got standards of cleaning, for example, in it. I think it's about 4 or 5 pages, which is, you know, quite significant. But it's designed to help you work out. I think there's actually, after a while, they divide it into bits. So there's actually a separate document just for looking at cleaning the premises, and to remind people that there's right. So if you're running something inside the building or even outside, there is a different level of cleaning to what your cleaner would normally come in and do everything with a bucket of water and so on. It's about wiping down particular surfaces that anybody's likely to be touching during that time. So door handles, rails, the backs of chairs, which is easier if they are wooden or metal. Cloth chairs are not so easy to do. The microphones that you might use, anything that people are likely to touch, you need to wipe down, which is why many of our congregations are not handing out Bibles or hymn books or so on. That's part of the reason for that. So that's what you need to do between each group. So let's say you have 10 people come in at 9 o'clock for a quiet prayer service, and you've got everybody spaced out on chairs. I mean, afterwards they when they leave, someone needs to go in and wipe down all those surfaces before anybody else can come in. And that I had taught to someone who had a school group coming in to use the premises, and they were going to have 10 people at a time to come and use the hall, and they were going to have the chairs in the hall with all the right social distancing and so on, but they need to allow time between groups so that that the cleaning is done for any surface that people are using, including bathrooms and so on. And then there is your regular cleaning, which once again, you might want to be more consistent and more do a proper clean. Deep cleaning is only required when we've actually had a case where a suspected case where a person's been on our premises that has now been tested positive. So we're hoping that we'll never have to have a deep cleaning situation in any of our premises. And that's why we're putting in place all the precautions that we can. But yes, we are aware that there may be a case where we have to employ someone come in and do a deep clean. Does that make that clear? So it's like spot cleaning with the proper hospital standard disinfectant with the alcohol level that's required, and that's needed between each group that comes in. And I assume that, Ray, you're using that level when you're doing your cleaning after each service.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Yeah. It's all of the cleaning is done by me. In between and that before we commence, in between the participants, and then post. So which is why it takes so long.
Okay. So you need to have one person or a team of people who share that load, but that you have to have the same standard of cleaning as you go. All right, there's a couple more questions. How do you appropriately clean fabric chairs? And yeah, it's a good question. Maybe just don't have fabric chairs. I don't know. I know some congregations, if they're thinking about having groups come in to use their hall, they will have the plastic chairs available, or the ones with metal rails on them and so on. Yep, Di says you should be able to clean fabric chairs with a spray disinfectant of a good quality. Okay, and Anne's, yeah, that question, the consideration of using a spray in between people coming and going rather than spray and wipe. Well, there's some things you might spray, like we've just said, and some things you definitely need to wipe. Yep. But walking through the room and just spraying a can around, it might work in airplanes, but it's not going to work in our church buildings. For outside, Annika says it may be a good idea to invest in a portable sound system. Do you want to say more about that, Annika?
Yes, I don't know what you would call it. I don't think a megaphone, but you know, there are these portable things. And I heard somewhere this week that they aren't that expensive, and it makes it possible to have gatherings outside, especially when it's worship type gatherings, where only one person is speaking. Where you don't have to project your voice as much, and it makes it easier for people to hear what's going on. So if you're planning to do that a bit more over, you know, Advent and Christmas and even in the new year, it may be worth exploring investing in something like that.
That's helpful, thank you. Now I'm going to put the 13, and I'm going to put the slide up again for sorry, I'll just get this right. There we are. So if you go to the Synod website, which is victaz.uca.org.au, you'll see this picture here with the COVID facts, and you click on that picture, that will take you to the page with all the up-to-date documents, including the frequently asked questions. And it will also include things like posters that you can put up with the number of people that are allowed in the building. It has some really useful resources. And so you don't have to remember all you need to know answers to your frequently asked questions. You could keep that as a favorite in your browser maybe. But if you go to the main Synod website, you'll see that that's always going to be available there. And a reminder that this is a really useful email to have. Just remember, crisis management at victaz.uca.org.au. So if you forget David Herbert's name, that's okay. You send it to that email, and the team will get it. Hopefully, one of those people will take the responsibility of replying. But it means that not only are you alerting to David Herbert and Eleanor Graham and Elnura Dulakovic to the situation, but you're also alerting the communications group and the Associate General Secretary, Isabel Thomas Dobson. So, yep, and they're not afraid to receive these emails. If you're feeling unhappy or grumpy about something, please be kind and just, you can say that you're frustrated, but what we're trying to do is help each other and encourage each other to have some clarity about the kinds of information and accuracy of information that we need. And in the rush to get these things out, sometimes some things aren't consistent. So let's give the good feedback that we need. And you can copy the Presbytery team, and it's always helpful. Denise Nash says that LD occasionally have portable speakers for sale, and they work well, between $200 and $300. Any final comments or questions? You're feeling okay? Probably the levels of stress are high. In some ways, while we had fewer opportunities to do anything as a church, we were getting used to that. But now we have to work out these questions of how we're going to re-enter, and we're having to interact with the rental groups who are keen to come back, many of whom their livelihoods depend on being able to run events in our buildings. And also our budgets rely on those as well. There's a bit of pressure, and November 9 is coming along. It's really important to take a breath, to consult. If you're not sure, give someone a call, and just remember that in the longer term, these 2 or 3 weeks are going to be where we learn a lot, where we've actually discovered the things that we need to put in place. And remember, it's okay to learn by experience. So we'll make some fumbles, I'm sure, but we're going to be able to get better at this, I'm sure. And Anne Simons, the feedback we received after trying the commercial cup and waiter was it's very difficult to open, especially if the fingers were not that nimble. I see this is the commercial cup and wafer. Yep, it's not easy for some of our elderly members to open those up. Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks for that feedback. Okay, all right. Well, I think we've come up to 5:30, and we said that this would be a 60-minute program, and we want to, Annika and I want to assure you that the Presbytery is glad that you're taking these responsibilities seriously. The stories we hear from our congregations fill us with hope that the Uniting Church is leading the way in being a responsible and caring community, helping people who are vulnerable feel better about connecting with one another, whether it's online, in our homes, hospitals and other places. But we are the people of God, and we're keeping up that sense of our calling to foster community wherever we are. So God's strength and love, peace and grace be with you this weekend.
To open your facilities, there are some things that the government expects that you have in place now. So a COVID safety plan, for instance, that checklist will help you through that. And it's making sure that you've actually thought through the elements. A COVID safety plan is required to reopen in the short term. So that's the one that Duncan's brought up. It's actually a requirement by the government. It's not something we'll put together. We'll probably simplify it a little, simply because often they won't refer to all of the requirements for a church. But it's making sure that you do have thought through the elements that are required to comply with the safety things. Some of the other things in there, a lot of the churches won't have been used for a period of time. So some of the activities that would have normally have occurred, it's sort of a checklist to think through some of those as well.
Okay.
So simply because churches or lots of buildings won't have been used for a period of time.
Yeah. And I see it's something that we need to have had in place anyway, which is essential safety measures, maintenance.
Yeah.
And of course, that wouldn't have been done for a while in many cases.
Some have, some may not have. So it's just thinking through those again, going, what do we need to do? Does all the emergency lighting work, for instance? Mm-hmm. Really simple things, practical things. They're just reminders to go, yeah, there's some stuff we need to do and make sure it's all just working.
And what do we do with this list? Someone's asked, do we really have to send this off to Synod, or is this something we can just make sure we have available?
No, we don't want to see every single one of them. Mm-hmm. It's a checklist to help people. It's a guide.
Yeah.
So
okay.
No, we're not asking you to send it to us.
Okay.
We have seen every COVID safety plan. That's pretty important because it's quite new. Most of those things are actually things we'd expect you to be doing anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Here's a lot. We're getting a lot of feedback, David, from people who notice that the frequently asked questions section on singing is going with the DHHS guidelines around singing, which basically don't say much, and you've given us some ways of mitigating the risk of singing, but you haven't banned it. Yeah.
we have actually gone directly to the Premier's department about this, and they've directed us to the DHHS's website, or sorry, their information. So we've been really specific in asking that question. That's the information that we have at the moment.
Okay.
And it comes directly from the government saying singing is actually okay. Just make sure you're doing all the social, the physical distancing things, keeping 1.5 metre different distance between people, wearing a mask.
Making sure there's a ventilation in the room and so on.
Yeah. So it's not, and we're aware of all the research and the other views, but that's what the government's telling us. So legitimately, we've asked the question and want to make sure that we do actually get what the government's telling us.
Yeah.
So we've validated that as best we can.
Okay, that's really helpful. Yes, we do know that some people are keen to get into it and they'll head down that track, whereas other people are not happy. They think it's far too risky, and their congregations have decided they're not going to have congregational singing in this space or this time. So it's really a matter of discernment for the local community.
Absolutely, and there are lots of factors in there. If the individuals that would actually be there would be one of those factors.
Yes.
Depends on how many people you can actually fit in. If you wanted to do it, maybe it's, if you wanted to be conservative, increase the distance.
Yeah.
Between the distance between people.
I know initially in Queensland, when the government said you're not allowed to have singing inside, and then the churches did a deal and they came up with 6 square meters per person. There we are.
Yes.
Alrighty. So food sharing. Sounds as though food sharing is going to be off for quite some time.
Yeah, I would expect that. I wouldn't expect that to occur until or be an allowed activity. And for a period of time, middle of next year would be a guess. Have no real idea, other than I've been doing a lot of research over the last few months. I would just think that that's likely to be the time frame.
Yeah. So we get people like funerals and who are desperate to have a cup of tea afterwards. And the funeral directors themselves are saying, hey, this is just not going to be easily to actually organise.
Yeah,
but
you
people
can take your
bring
own.
their own thermos flask and a cup of tea and yeah.
Sit there and like you do at the football without going to the thing, pour your cup of tea and share it together, but you can't make it and distribute, serve it to each other.
Right. So no coffee urns, no water, boiling up the water for people to go and help themselves. All right. Bring your own boiling water.
Yep.
And first, he's still concerned about, which are there some groups that can come back and use the halls and some that can't?
Yes.
Can you give us any clarification on that?
More information, please.
Well, the government are quite specific. So one of the things that we are doing now, we recognise that's becoming more of an issue. I'm building a list that we're going to include in the frequently asked questions. So some examples. Dance groups for kids 18 and under, yes, they can. And some of the recreational activities for children under that age can. But if the participants are over 18, so Zumba for adults is not allowed yet. It may change. Things like toy libraries, it's similar to a library service, and that's not allowed at the moment. I'm thinking through some of the other areas. Some martial arts, so kung fu, taekwondo. I think for kids under 18 and under, if they're non-contact, they can. They can't if they're contact, and they can't if they're over 18. Toastmasters can't. Choirs can't, but you can sing in church, if that makes sense. So
play groups?
Play groups, I would interpret that. I haven't actually had that question. I might take that one on advisement. I'm more than happy to.
Because that'll be a big one, people keen. There's a question about Alcoholics Anonymous and Gamblers Anonymous, etc.
Yeah, so all of those are. So there's a specific, they're a permitted activity. They're certainly allowed to. And that's really clear. The government really want to support that. So AA can. I have a suspicion about playgroups, but I'll get that clarified and I'll shoot it through to you, Duncan, just to confirm.
Yeah, that'd be great.
My understanding.
Yes. The another one which is coming up is where school groups would say, well, can we have our young people come and do something in the hall? And we have a safety action plan for the local church, which says so many people allowed in that space because of the social distancing. And the school says, well, actually, that doesn't apply to our kids because we're a school.
Two things. I would probably, I'll qualify that, probably agree with that. I'd probably want to ask the specific details.
Yeah. Because
schools do have permitted activities that other areas don't. Those sorts of things, really happy to ask the question of the advisory group and go, yeah, this is right. Some of the areas that can operate, some places have some tutoring schools that, or tutoring businesses that operate from their facilities. They can operate. There will always need to be, so there's a caveat there, there will always be social distancing requirements or physical distancing requirements, and you need to have a COVID safety plan, and the operator needs to have a COVID safety plan as well.
Yeah. All right. So physical distancing, we have to work out how many people per square meter and so on. Is that part of the deal? Is there a size limit for these self-help groups that meet?
Yes. So they're sort of defined in their own physical distancing requirements, which is typically 1.5 meters between people. So we're not sitting right next to each other.
Question. I'm coming back to that public gatherings and meetings in our car park. You might see it in the chat there.
On page 1, we actually do define the differences. So there are different numbers in those. So a gathering can be up to 10 people outdoors from any number of households, but no further than 25 kilometres from your workplace, from your residence, sorry. But religious outdoor gatherings, you can have up to 20.
Okay. And
so there are different numbers.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, and part of that is because if we've got a faith leader overseeing the gathering, we're assuming that some things will be put in place to ensure that things are kept safe. For example, we've made it clear that people are not to be serving up a barbecue or a cup of tea afterwards. So people need to bring their own food and drink. Would that be correct?
Yep, absolutely.
So keep those barbecues back in storage for a little bit longer. Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Here's a question. So a church member has asked whether we can put 10 people in our hall, which adjoins our sanctuary, where we could also have 10. What do you think about that?
So yes, they do actually talk about different groups of 10. off the top of my head, and I would need to find the specific things. So most of these questions will actually be in the FAQs.
Yeah.
You can have different groups of 10 people, but no more than 20 in any
total
area in total. And there needs to be 10 metres between the individual groups.
Right. Okay.
So,
maybe we'll come back and have it find the details on that shortly.
Yep.
Yes. Okay, so churches and other facilities may be used for indoor ceremonies for a faith leader and up to 10 members of the public in multiple groups, with each group socially distant using appropriate social distancing. Okay. It is not permitted to conduct both indoor and outdoor gatherings at the same time. Interesting. So, all right, so trying to get a way to have a lot of people all at once is not a great idea. And I must say, you might think it's fine in theory to have those different groups meeting, but after the service finishes, what happens then? Particularly if they're all mingling around outside with their thermos flasks.
Personally, I would say that becomes a group of greater than.
Yeah.
So have them finish at different times would be a practical way of doing that, and actually saying, can you move out, etc. But I recognise you may want to mingle in the groups.
Yeah. Can we get on to op shops?
Yes.
Interesting.
So
the Uniting VicTaz op shops are recommended not to open. Okay, someone's asking about VicTaz op shops. That was Uniting VicTaz.
So a lot of our op shops are run by Uniting, and they are reopening, but there are some that are actually being run. There are a few that are run by congregations. They are allowed to reopen now. So there is some guidance in the FAQs around what's required and the complexities that will be involved in reopening. So for those, someone just asked if I could include the link. So I'll put the link to the FAQs. They are a really good resource. I'm trying to refer to those in most of my responses to you. And it just means that I don't have to remember every single thing. There will be some additional requirements if you want to reopen. And there's a contact for Elnura if you want to reopen and understand what would be required for those. So there's an email in that thing if you need some additional assistance on that.
That's great, really helpful. Yes, we had Elnura come and speak to us earlier. So I imagine she's got her head all around op shops. And
yep.
Yeah.
It means I don't have to.
Okay, now here we are. This is a recurring question. Hiring to outside groups. And I remember talking to you earlier, are dance groups allowed to start meeting on the 9th of November? I think you've noted in the frequently asked questions that they're currently not, but there's something coming up because we know that dance groups are starting to turn up and say, can we begin?
So at the moment, the current requirement depends on the age of the participants. If they're 18 years and under, they can. If they're over 18, they can't. That's a government distinction, not ours.
And is that likely to change at all?
Yes, the question is when. Will it? We think it might at the next change on the 9th, 8th, 9th, whatever the date is.
On the 1 minute past midnight.
Yeah.
On the morning of the 9th, yes. So we've got a number of groups who are now who are anticipating that and are turning up to book up spaces.
Yeah, so we will, as soon as we can, we will.
Yeah.
But that's based on the government regulations. It can sometimes take a little bit of time for them to define exactly what they would like or how they're interpreting certain things.
Okay. Now now we're coming to cleaning. All right. So this is the big challenge for our congregations with their safety plan, is working out how much to clean. And so one thing to clean after their own worship services. Let's say you had 2 or 3 during the day or during the week. Do you need to clean between each service or each week? Yes.
Yeah, so that's actually a government requirement. Mm-hmm. So if you have groups meeting, you do need to clean in between. So when we talk about cleaning those, so it is actually quite specific. It's not your full normal clean, like scrubbing toilets and mopping the floors and all those sorts of things. Quite specifically, it'll be more focused on cleaning surfaces that people touch.
Yeah. So
with a hospital grade disinfectant, going through and cleaning all those areas. Door handles, handrails.
The backs of seats.
Yeah. Where they're solid, where they're material, it'll be harder. You won't be able to get it off.
Yeah.
If it's on there. It's just reality. But being aware of that.
Yes, I had one church who have a group who want to hire the hall for a day, and they're going to bring in groups of 10 at a time and have them spaced out in the hall. So that covers everything. But they need to clean it after each group of 10 people before someone else comes in.
Yeah.
And once again, it's door handles, rails, and if they're using the bathroom, they need to clean that as well.
Yeah. And it's typically the areas that people will touch.
Yeah.
Rather than anything else, rather than the normal cleaning, if that makes sense.
Okay. Food sharing. Sounds as though food sharing is going to be off for quite some time.
Yeah, I would expect that. I wouldn't expect that to occur until or be an allowed activity. And for a period of time, middle of next year would be a guess. Have no real idea other than I've been doing a lot of research over the last few months. I would just think that that's likely to be the time frame.
Yeah. So we get people like funerals and who are desperate to have a cup of tea afterwards. And the funeral directors themselves are saying, hey, this is just not going to be easily to actually organise.
Yeah,
but
you can
bring their own thermos flask and a cup of tea and
yeah, sit there and act like you do at the football without going to the thing. Pour your cup of tea and share it together, but you can't make it and serve it to each other.
Right. So no coffee urns, no water boiling up the water for people to go and help themselves. All right. Bring your own boiling water.
Yep.
All righty. Now, Ian Firth, he's still concerned about, which are there some groups that can come back and use the halls and some that can't?
Yes.
Can you give us any clarification on that?
More information, please.
Well, the government are quite specific. So one of the things that we are doing now, we recognise that's becoming more of an issue. I'm building a list that we're going to include in the frequently asked questions. So some examples. Dance groups for kids 18 and under, yes, they can. And some of the recreational activities for children under that age can. But if the participants are over 18, so Zumba for adults is not allowed yet. It may change. Things like toy libraries, it's similar to a library service, and that's not allowed at the moment. I'm thinking through some of the other areas, some martial arts, so Kung Fu, Taekwondo, I think for kids under 18 and under, if they're non-contact, they can. They can't if they're contact, and they can't if they're over 18. Toastmasters can't. Choirs can't, but you can sing in church, if that makes sense. So
play groups?
Play groups, I would interpret that. I haven't actually had that question. I might take that one on advisement. I'm more than happy to.
Because that'll be a big one, people keen. There's a question about Alcoholics Anonymous and Gamblers Anonymous, etc.
Yeah, so all of those are. So there's a specific, they're a permitted activity. They're certainly allowed to. And that's really clear. The government really want to support that. So AA can. I have a suspicion about playgroups, but I'll get that clarified and I'll shoot it through to you, Duncan, just to confirm.
Yeah, that'd be great.
My understanding.
Yes. The another one which is coming up is where school groups would say, well, can we have our young people come and do something in the hall? And we have a safety action plan for the local church, which says so many people allowed in that space because of the social distancing. And the school says, well, actually, that doesn't apply to our kids because we're a school.
Two things. I would probably, I'll qualify that, probably agree with that. I'd probably want to ask the specific details.
Yeah.
Because schools do have permitted activities that other areas don't. Those sorts of things, really happy to ask the question of the advisory group and go, yeah, this is right. Some of the areas that can operate, some places have some tutoring schools that, or tutoring businesses that operate from their facilities. They can operate. There will always need to be, so there's a caveat there, there will always be social distancing requirements or physical distancing requirements, and you need to have a COVID safety plan, and the operator needs to have a COVID safety plan as well.
Yeah. All right. So physical distancing, we have to work out how many people per square metre and so on. Is that part of the deal? Is there a limit of a size limit for these self-help groups that meet?
Yes. So they're sort of defined in their own physical distancing requirements, which is typically 1.5 metres between people. Okay. So we're not sitting right next to each other.
So that's okay. I think we'll see if people are satisfied or are they looking for a number. It can be somewhat, the group size for dating and self-help groups for dancing and so on. Dating, yeah. So, yep, there's people who get together to social groups and so on. Yep.
Sorry, what was that one?
She meant dancing, not dating.
Oh, I see. I see. Okay.
I was going, gee, how close are you going to get through that?
That's right. We speed dating, indeed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So dancing and self-help groups. Is there a group? Okay. So is there a group size? Yeah. And yeah. Okay. The language and the frequently asked. Okay. There's a size limit for our own groups for worship services. So the question is there something for other groups that have to come in?
I would believe so. They will always need to, I'm probably going to need to validate that. I don't know the number off my top of the head, but I would think, I think they're the same as ours, but I'll double check that.
Now the 18 and unders is primarily focused on the dance groups and other similar indoor exercise groups. Now, what about, so third age, so education tutoring doesn't have that same age limit, surely?
So adult education does. So that's an excluded or a restricted activity, should be done from home for now.
Okay.
The English classes, English as second language classes or anything like that, for adults, it needs to be done remotely. And that's quite explicit in the government regulations.
Right, well, that's interesting, because there'll be some of them keen to meet up again.
Yeah, so unfortunately, at the moment, it's not one of those permitted activities.
Right. Tennis clubs?
So tennis clubs outside can start to meet again and play.
And once again, there'll be quite specific guidelines from Tennis Australia, which we were looking at back in July.
Yes, tutoring is allowed for people under the age of 18, not for over the 18.
Okay.
Organ lessons and practice. So I've actually just had this question answered for me, simply because I had no idea how I'd interpret that. Yes, we can have organ lessons. If they are playing, if it's for, yeah, if people are being paid for organ lessons, yes, they can. Still need to maintain physical distancing.
Okay.
But you can do that. And practice of organ is allowed now too.
You need to keep those pipe organs working.
Yeah, absolutely.